Hello everyone, word has it that you are interested in a review of My Little Pony the movie. Maybe I can be of service. Okay, who the fucks are you? And what are you doing in my house? I know the show is called Fox Review, but this doesn't mean that every fox can just walk into my channel and review movies. Also, what's up with the scorpion tail? Oh, you must be tricky. What a pleasure to meet you. I am Mendax, the Script. The Script. That's an odd title. Well, let me explain. I was originally intended to be in the movie. I am what you would call a prototype, the character that eventually became Kappa. As such, I have some knowledge of script concepts that didn't make it into the movie. Knowledge that might be useful for analyzing it. And I came to offer it to you, my fellow fox. You know, for a moment I thought you tried to poison me with your scorpion tail and take over my channel. Of course not. If you watch my spoiler-free review, you already know my general opinion on this movie. I overall liked it, but there were a couple of things that bugged me. Now, some people accused me that I was only disappointed because I expected My Little Pony the movie to be a flawless masterpiece. Yeah, no. However, I did expect this movie to be at least as good as the two-parter of the show, or something comparable to the second and third Equestria Girls movie. And indeed, the movie had more than a few things in common with your average season finale, which is for the most part a good thing, as the two-parters are usually the episodes I enjoy the most, but it also means that this movie falls into the same trap as those episodes. Not to mention that some plot elements do feel a bit copy-pasted from Twilight's Kingdom. Let's run them down. Twilight Sparkle is feeling insecure about her role as a princess. A villain shows up and catches the other three princesses to steal their magic, but they have to find Twilight first for their plan to succeed. Eventually the villain manages to absorb the magic of the four Alicorn princesses and betrays his own ally, which eventually causes his own downfall. This is not helped by the fact that many people compared the Storm King to Tyrek immediately after his design was revealed. You think that's bad? You should take a look at the art book, which also features my marvelous design. Apparently it was considered to include the scene in which the Storm King acquires his staff. One idea was that he stole it from Tyrek's brother, Scorpion. They even included a picture of him holding the staff. Frankly, it would have been interesting to see Scorpion, as it would elaborate on already established lore. But it would also tie the Storm King's source of power directly to Tyrek and makes the similarities even more obvious. Not to mention that it would cause a bit of a continuity lockout for people that don't follow the show. In any case, while the similarities bother me a bit, I think they are not too distracting, as things play out much differently in the end. It also helps that the Storm King is personality-wise much different from Tyrek, something I already realized after reading the prequel comic. That being said, I think the Storm King doesn't get enough time to establish himself in the movie proper. Sure, he gets a couple of funny lines, but in the end he only has one phone call with Tempest, telling her not to fail him and betraying her later on after he gains the power he was looking for. I still liked him for the most part, but he seems like an afterthought as the focus is overall more on Tempest. Not to mention that the things I liked about him in the comics are that he could be very pragmatic and somewhat charismatic. He treated his soldiers rather well, but at the same time never considered them friends. We hardly get to see that side of him. Rather, we only saw an overconfident, power-hungry tyrant who betrayed the one who did all the work for him. Well, to be fair, the fact that he betrayed Tempest came with no surprise. We all knew Tempest would turn a new leaf at the end, and she obviously needed a reason. You can also make a case that he was pragmatic, because we don't know if he was even able to fix her horn to begin with. It was most likely something that he just said to gain her trust, and he might be thinking that she will betray him as soon as she gets what she wants. Tempest talking about how she will show everyone what she is capable of certainly didn't help. And if we consider the comics, we also have to remember that the Storm King was betrayed by his last second in command, so you could say that he is not taking any chances now that he reached his goal. Though, even with the comics in mind, his motivation of total control is not exactly deep. Also, why isn't he with Tempest when she conquers Canterlot? They never bother to explain that. Thing is that the Storm King is overall a fun character to have around, but he's not around enough. He doesn't really interact with anyone beside Tempest, which is quite disappointing. I would have loved to see him talk with Celestia, as his interaction with other characters in the comics were surprisingly memorable. In general, I think it would have worked better to have either him or Tempest be the villain. Having them both around prevents both from getting the necessary time for proper development. On the other paw, it could have worked if the Storm King was more serious and less of a goofball. I mean, he can be pretty intimidating if he wants to, but he would have been more effective if they had scrapped his comedic aspects and pronounced his status as an evil overlord more, making him scarier. Now Fizzlepop Berrytwist obviously gets the better end of the deal, no doubt about it. She immediately established herself as a threat by taking out the princesses and beating up pretty much everyone she comes across. She also gets a song which explains her background story, which is compelling enough to make people show sympathy towards her. Is it edgy? Yes, but a broken horn that turns her into a social outcast is a much better motive than most antagonists in the show have. Still, her last minute redemption felt a bit rushed like usual, as her character appears a bit too one note, being the evil unicorn that doesn't believe in friendship. I personally missed the nuance she had in the stormy road to Canterlot. That chapter book greatly elaborates on her background story and details how she became the pony we see in the movie. Especially noteworthy is her relationship with Grubber, as they do bond in that book. Something you don't see in this movie. Her redemption would be much more believable if she would show a soft spot for Grubber at some point. Speaking of which, why is he in the movie? Like really, what purpose does he serve if not to explore his relationship with Tempest? He gets a couple of funny lines here and there, but it is barely enough to consider him comic relief, especially since the Storm King himself is rather funny. For the most part, you can cut him out of the movie and nothing of value would be lost. In any case, back to Tempest. The one thing I cannot ignore about Fizzlepop is how she is another Twilight clone. The prequel chapter book made it very obvious, as she basically dreamed of living Twilight's life as Celestia's faithful student and even wondering if she could become a princess if she just tries hard enough. The movie itself actually plays it down. Sure, she is still a unicorn that doesn't believe in friendship, and she tells Twilight that they both were betrayed by their friends, but that's pretty much it. The movie doesn't try to force it down our throats, like with Sunset Shimmer in their first Equestria Girls movie, when Celestia spells it out that Sunset is her former pupil. Most importantly, the writer seemingly learned their lesson and gave her a more inspired name. After Sunset Shimmer and Starlight Glimmer, I expected her true name to be something along the lines of Dusk Glitter, so everyone gets that she's another evil Twilight. I take Fizzlepop Berrytwist over that every day, even if that name is just one big punchline. Though her fake name, while edgy, is admittedly somewhat clever. Tempest basically means storm, so her name pretty much implies that she is the shadow of the Storm King, a pretty good name for his second in command. But at the same time, she's also a shadow of Twilight, giving her name a nice double meaning. The funny thing is, I think Tempest works better as a foil to Twilight than both Sunset and Starlight, but not because she is so similar to Twilight, but rather because Twilight starts mirroring Tempest. Tempest felt betrayed by her friends, and most of her actions throughout the movie and before are driven by her desperate desire to restore her horn, which, while understandable, is a selfish motivation. Twilight on the other hand is focused on saving Equestria, which, in theory, is a selfless motivation. But even though their motives are the total opposite of each other, Twilight acts more and more like Tempest as she becomes more desperate. She starts to distrust pretty much everyone, including her friends, for arguably understandable reason I have to add. After all, Kepper originally intended to sell them, and her friends sort of made things worse by not taking their quest seriously. Especially the Rainbow wasn't any help, does she? This ends with Twilight using her friends as distraction to steal the magic pearl of transformation from Queen Novo, which highlights the similarities between Twilight and Tempest even further if you read the prequel comics and the stormy road to Canterlot. In the prequel comic, Tempest tricked a pony that treated her like a friend to serve as a distraction so she can escape. When the stormy road to Canterlot, she took advantage of Queen Novo's hospitality to steal the pearl for the Storm King, which drove Novo to transform her subjects into sea ponies in the first place. Now this gives a whole new meaning to Novo's line. This is why we don't bring strangers into our home, doesn't it? The movie tells us that they are not so different without rubbing it in our face. which actually is some clever storytelling. Now, of course, there's a point to be made that you shouldn't have to read a tie-in comic or chapter book to get this sort of subtext, but I don't think that you have to do it. It still works if you don't, but it does enhance the experience and makes the similarities easier to see. Also, this only works if you consider the comics or the chapter books canon. The Stormy Road to Canterlot, for example, has a couple of inconsistencies. First of all, it implies that everything takes place within a couple of months, which comes with multiple problems and makes it hard to fit into the timeline. Then there's Tempest Wizard at Mount Aris, which supposedly takes place a couple of months before the movie at best, while the runes we see in the movie seem to be abandoned for years. Also, the Storm King already had his staff when he first met Fizzlepop in the book, while in the movie he seemingly just acquired it and doesn't exactly know what it does, which is why Tempest has to explain it to him. So do these inconsistencies mean that it's definitely not canon? Well, mistakes happen, and maybe they changed some details in the movie after the prequel novel was already written. I personally consider it canon simply because it added a lot of details I happen to like. In any case, speaking of that staff, what was it? Staff of Secondness? How does that thing even work? The movie seemingly implies that the Storm King needs all 4 Alicorn princesses to activate it. That's a rather specific requirement, considering there were only 2 Alicorns for 1,000 years until Cadence and Twilight came around, at least as far as we know. Now, why does it need all 4 princesses to work? The simple answer is that the plot needed an excuse. Why Tempest has to hunt down Twilight? If the Storm King could simply absorb the magic of everyone like Tyrek, why should he bother to hunt her down? Even with only the power of 3 Alicorns, he would be more than powerful enough to do anything he wants. He might not even bother to get Twilight, and he would be too powerful too early on, making it almost impossible to stop him. So it works to get the plot moving, but it feels like a very contrived reason why they need Twilight and therefore pretty forced. Not to mention that this only works because the movie ignores Flurry Heart's existence. I can only assume that Shining Armor and Flurry Heart stayed behind in the Crystal Empire. Okay, I know that Flurry Heart wasn't a thing when they started working on this movie, but it is already confirmed that this movie supposedly takes place between seasons 7 and 8. Well, like I mentioned earlier, they considered explaining the origin of the staff. Oh, you're still here? In any case, how does that explanation help? If Scorpion was the original owner, it would obviously explain the staff's ability to drain magic, yes. We could assume that Tyrek created it, or that Tyrek copied the magic of the staff somehow, but it doesn't explain the ridiculous specific requirement someone would need to use the staff. If you were to let me finish, I was getting to that. This was only one considered idea. Another one was that the staff is actually a branch of the Tree of Harmony. They even redesigned the staff to make it look a bit more like one of its roots. Now, obviously, this didn't make it into the final cut. They wouldn't call it the Staff of Secondness if that was the case. But let's pretend for a moment that they did. You would still need to rewrite a couple of scenes, but you could reason that the staff requires Twilight to work actually represents the element of magic. The other 3 princesses would only be needed for their power, but Twilight would be essential for his plan to work. That actually makes a lot of sense. While it is still a very specific requirement for the staff to work, it makes a lot more sense in context, as Twilight is connected to this tree to some degree. I mean, it has her cutie mark on it. It feels more natural than a completely unrelated artifact that requires 4 Alicorns to work. I'm actually a bit mad that they cut this explanation. Trust me, I have more where that came from. The art book has a lot of cool concepts that make you say, wow, that sounds amazing, why did they cut it? Well, does the art book explain how Tempest was able to take out 3 Alicorns without breaking a sweat? Tempest was originally meant to be Celestia's and Luna's brother and was called Cosmos, but no, there's no explanation for that. Go figure. Well, we all know that it would happen. While Alicorn magic is supposedly very powerful, Princess Celestia and Luna are usually rather useless in the great scheme of things. The show at least tries to explain why Twilight must be the one to save the day most of the time. Celestia was captured by Nightmare Moon. This god is more powerful than both and can only be defeated by the elements of harmony. Crystal has absorbed so much law that she can overpower Celestia, while Luna isn't there. Luna would go and deal with King Sombra, but it is a test for Twilight to prove herself. Celestia and Luna are captured by Discord's backup plan he prepared 1,000 years ago. Discord teamed up with Tarek, so it might be better if they all just entrust their magic to Twilight. Cadence actually fares much better in comparison, as she defeated Chrissy with the power of love and fought off Sombra for days. In Season 5 they simply weren't aware of Starlight, and Celestia seemed at least somewhat competent in this Sombra timeline. Season 6 on the other hand was a pretty bad offender, as we are led to believe that some random changelings were able to take not only down the princesses, but the entire main 6 off screen. Still, for the most part, these explanations are somewhat justified. But here in the movie, 4 Alicorn princesses who wield incredible powerful magic, as the movie reminds us, against 1 edgy unicorn with a broken horn. Yeah, in theory there's no way HGSS can come out on top in this situation. So they gave her these strange grenades that not only turn them into stone, but also bypass magical defenses. Yeah, I would like to know where they got those and how they work. When I watched the trailer, I noticed that they look somewhat similar to the Misfortune Malachite in the prequel comics. The Misfortune Malachite is supposed to be an incredible powerful artifact, so that added up. Sounds like something Tempest could use to take out the princesses. That would be a sound explanation. But then the Storm King destroyed it in the last issue without anyone ever using it, and it's never brought up again. So that's clearly not it. Now, to be fair, while it bugs me to no end, we don't exactly need an explanation why they are seemingly immune to magic and capable to turn ponies into stone for the story to work. However, even if we accept that, the scene is still bad. I can give Cadence a pass. She was the first to be hit and at least tried to shield herself with magic, and was surprised when the grenade penetrated her shield. But Celestia and Luna didn't even try. Now, what does the wise and powerful Celestia do? She turns her back to her opponent and explains to her sister what she has to do step by step instead of quickly coming to the point. Luna at least tried to escape afterwards, but she doesn't look out for incoming attacks. Why none of them at least tries to fight Tempest, preventing her from just throwing these around, or simply uses a teleportation spell, is beyond me. Now, some of you might try to justify it by saying that they were all shocked after Cadence was turned into stone, and in Twilight's case that's a possibility. But Luna and Celestia should be capable to handle such a situation. Especially Celestia, who didn't hesitate to banish her sister to the moon when she turned evil. Not to mention that Celestia immediately came up with a plan what has to be done to save them, namely sending Luna to Queen Novo, so she couldn't be that shocked. Okay, I give her some points for not relying on Twilight to fix everything for once, and instead gives the task to someone who should be more qualified on paper. But just standing there talking while not even looking at what your opponent is doing is just stupid. She pretty much asked to be turned into stone next. Also, where was the Royal Guard in all of this? But I digress, the Royal Guard is never around when they are needed. Now, after that, the movie is all about exploring the lands beyond Equestria. It's one of the big selling points after all. And indeed, we get to see Klugtown, Mount Ares and Sequestria, and all 3 places are pretty awesome. Not to mention that I really like the utilization of airships in this movie. The world of MLP suddenly seems much bigger. And the new places are all very interesting. I personally love Klugtown, but I also think that these places are all rather underutilized in the end. Everything can be pretty much summarized like this. The main 6 arrive at their new location. They meet someone, sing a song, and then something bad happens and they have to leave. As a result, the new locations are hardly more than an interesting background we get to see for about 5 minutes each before we are somewhere else. They just rush from one place to the next. In the end, we spend half of the movie in Canterlot after all. Well, thanks to the different art design in this movie, it at least feels like a much different place. I also have to add that's why I would have preferred if they had spent more time at any given location. The fast pacing of this movie makes for a rather exciting ride. It never gets boring, so it's not all bad. However, it still somewhat feels like they tried to do way too many things in this movie at once, which is perhaps most evident if you take a look at all the new characters. I already pointed out that Storm King and Tempest could have used a bit more screen time, and that Grubber was pretty much a non-entity. The other characters have similar problems. Perhaps the worst offender are Seleno and her Sky Pirates. First of all, there are 5 of them. so they all have to appear unique. The character designs are pretty good, and I like the running theme that each of them lost a part of their body. Now in general the focus is on Seleno. Her crew is basically just a bunch of extras because a captain is nothing without a crew, and that's okay. Overall, they are a lot of fun and I do like their song. What does irritate me is that they serve the Storm King for no real reason. They are seemingly forced to work for him, but no one is keeping an eye on them. They could simply take their airship and fly wherever they want and no one would notice until they are already far away. Sure, they have to avoid the Storm King troops afterward, but that obviously was the case before they were forced to work for him to begin with. They are pirates, outlaws. Running away and fighting authority is kinda their thing. Now maybe they really feared the Storm King that much, but I think that's a rather weak explanation. There should be at least one person to boss them around. They could have used Grubber for that, just saying. Now admittedly we see how the Storm King captures them in the prequel comic, though it is not mentioned how he plans to keep Seleno in check. But one thing I did notice in that comic is that there were way more pirates in Seleno's crew. Did the Storm King make an example out of them to get Seleno in line? Does he hold them hostage? Did the comic artist simply edit a couple to fill the background? Probably the latter, but I suppose the first two options are a possibility. And here's another detail that bothered me. Seleno was perfectly willing to fight Tempest and her troops to protect the main six. But after Twilight and the others made their escape, completely blowing their cover, confirming to Tempest that Seleno tried to hide them, she just stands there and lets Tempest blow up their ship. So she is fine fighting to protect Twilight and co, but unwilling to protect herself and her men? That doesn't make any sense. Also, I don't want to sound mean, but the airship was probably the most useful thing about these pirates. After Twilight is captured by Tempest, the main six stay behind in the middle of nowhere. Then Kepper and the pirates appear, give a rousing speech, but the problem remains that they don't really have the means to return to Equestria in time. The movie just has them arrive shortly after Tempest, but how did they do it? It just seems like they teleported there. Now imagine Seleno would appear after Kepper's speech on their airship, offering the remaining five a ride back home. Wouldn't they suddenly appear much more helpful and overall more important to the plot? Well, Seleno and her pirates were originally conceived as minor antagonists and went through multiple redesigns. The original rule is never really explained in this art book other than the fact that they were supposed to be purely villains. But there is this concept artwork of the hippogriffs joining the remaining five and the pirates on their journey to rescue Twilight, and they are traveling on Seleno's ship. No doubt about it, indicating that in an earlier draft of the movie the ship wasn't destroyed. Wait. Did you just say that more hippogriffs than just Skystar were originally meant to help in the final battle? Yes. In an earlier draft, AJ apparently called Queen Novo selfish for hiding when she could help stop the Storm King, which would have been a very nice use of her honesty for sure. Novo seemingly got second thoughts because of that and decided to help after all. There's even a concept artwork of them fighting against the Storm King's army, saving the day. But according to the art book, they changed it because they felt like the ending should be more about the main six as they are the heroes. And maybe they wanted to avoid having people compare the hippogriffs with the eagles from Lord of the Rings, but that's just my guess. Are you kidding me? This would solve like 70% of the issues I have with this movie. Nope, it's all in the art book. Okay then. Where to begin? My biggest issue I have with this movie is that the whole journey of the main six seems kinda pointless by the end. This is mostly due to the fact that the hippogriffs, or sea ponies, even though they are never called sea ponies in the movie, do absolutely nothing, with the exception of Princess Skystar, but even she hardly makes a difference. The whole point of the journey was to get the help of the hippogriffs because the main six alone had no chance to beat the bad guys on their own. But all they managed to accomplish was to befriend a cat, 5 birds and a bird-horse hybrid. For the record, I like them overall, but they are not nearly enough to make a difference. All they provide are some extra muscles in the final battle against an army that previously conquered the entire city of Canterlot without a problem, and the Storm King who wields the magic of all 4 alicorns by this point. The art book also implies that he channeled all the magic of Equestria through the princesses. Not to mention that they also lost Twilight, so all things considered, their odds are even worse than during Tempest's invasion in the beginning. The Hippogriffs would have been an acceptable solution to their problem. Have them team up and fight against the army together. If you want to focus more on the main six, okay, have the Hippogriffs fight the Storm creatures in the background while the main six deal with the Storm King. The way it was handled in this movie feels hollow, as there is no payoff to their adventure. They only were capable to save the day because they managed to disarm the Storm King by shooting themselves out of Pinky's cake cannon, which admittedly is a rather literal example of a Chekhov gun. But it was only a lucky shot. They didn't aim at him. People say he was only defeated because he betrayed Tempest, which is only partially true. Sure, if it wasn't for Tempest, he might have been able to use that grenade to turn the main six into stone, but it would have never come to this if they hadn't disarmed him previously. So in practice, the Storm King was defeated by dumb luck. Frankly, at this point it just seems to me like the writers wrote themselves into a corner. The movie was written like the Hippogriffs are meant to help in the final battle. They are built up as a powerful ally and they even have a powerful MacGuffin that could help Equestria. But they wanted to focus more on the main six, which is a fair enough reason, but if you don't want the Hippogriffs to steal the spotlight, you have to replace them during the climax with something else. But the writers seemingly couldn't think of anything. The main six didn't have much of a plan. Kappa helps them to sneak in with a Trojan horse cake, but their cover was immediately blown afterwards. And then things just sort of worked out. Imagine watching Twilight's Kingdom. Everything happens like usual, only that the main six never unlock the box, even though they tease the box throughout the episode. Instead, Tarek is defeated because something breaks his horn due to a stupid coincidence, unleashing all the magic he absorbed, while the box never comes into play. Would that be a satisfying conclusion? Thing is, there would have been a very simple solution to this problem. Have Skystar steal the Pearl of Transformation and use it to defeat the Storm King. This way, Skystar would actually do something to help, and the journey to the Hippogriffs wouldn't have been a complete waste of time. Now of course there is a case to be made that Skystar stealing the Pearl is not any better than Twilight doing it. Though I think this could be justified if Skystar explicitly states that she thinks her mother is wrong and that it is their responsibility to help if they can. The other option would have been for Twilight to have some friendship epiphany, like usual, to remobilize the Storm King or something like that. Well, apparently they considered a new friendship super mode at some point but scrapped that idea because the show already did that. And yes, it would have made this movie even more similar to Twilight's Kingdom. So it was probably better that they tried to avoid it, but fact of the matter is that they only caused further problems this way. Another problem with the Hippogriffs is that it makes little sense for the main six to go to them in the first place. Admittedly, this is not as much of a problem if you judge this movie on its own merits and ignore the show. I get that they tried to make this movie as self-contained as possible so that newcomers can enjoy it. But if we put this movie into the context of the show, you start to wonder why Celestia wanted to send Luna to them when there are like a dozen other possible allies that are easier to contact and probably more willing to help. First of all, there's of course Discord, who could literally solve the whole conflict with a finger snap. He might be even able to fix Fizzlepop's horn while he is at it. Because of that, it makes sense that he isn't in the movie at all, not counting the balloon cameo, and I think I saw a shadow in the credits. They would need to come up with a contrived reason why he can't solve everything in an instant. Not to mention that he comes and goes as he likes, so him not showing up is admittedly not that weird. But beside him, Twilight and Co could have asked the Changelings, the Dragons, or even the Yaks for help. Not to mention that it is safe to assume that not all of Ponykind was at Canterlot on that day, so they probably could have gone to the Crystal Empire for help as well. Again, if you're watching this movie without any knowledge of the show, this is not as much of a problem. But it is also questionable if the Hippogriffs would be of any help in the first place. After all, the Hippogriffs were driven into exile by the Storm King. And another thing that bugs me is, why did Celestia expect them to help? Novo just doesn't seem to care all that much about anything else than the well-being of her subjects. Though maybe things would have been different if Twilight didn't completely forget that she is a princess. At no point does she bring up that she is a princess, or that Celestia herself said Novo could help them. Maybe the Queen of the Hippogriffs would have been more willing to help if Twilight had been a little bit more diplomatic. She might have recognized Twilight as a princess by the fact that she is an alicorn, but as we know from the show, most ponies are unable to add 1 and 1 together, so from Queen Nova's point of view, they are just a bunch of random ponies. But admittedly, this is just a small problem. I would like to mention that I like the hippogriffs in general. Both Mount Iris and Sequestria look pretty impressive, and Skystar is adorable. Well, I think it's a bit strange that she has no friends among the sea ponies. She doesn't seem very isolated from the rest. But I suppose having an upbeat personality doesn't mean that she can't be socially awkward, and maybe the other hippogriffs were too nervous to approach her, considering she is a princess. I think it would have worked better if they had explored it a bit more, and if the main 6 helped her making some friends. Queen Nova's also cool, but it really feels like she was supposed to get at least one more scene. Her motivation to protect her subjects is pretty good. I actually like that she opened up to the main 6 during the song, but after she realized that Twilight tried to steal the magic pearl, her character arc just comes to a halt. She needed at least one more scene, not counting her showing up at the end just to jokingly tell her doctor that she is grounded. Maybe a small conversation with Celestia or something like that. I really would have liked to see that scene in which AJ calls her out on her selfishness, especially since Applejack did nothing throughout the movie other than tagging along. Though Fluttershy got it even worse this time around. Those two contributed nothing to the plot, and if I wouldn't know the show, I would wonder why they are even there. Now that is not uncommon for the show as well. The show often struggles to give the entirety of the main 6 something to do in episodes that feature all of them. In theory, a full feature-length movie should have been able to avoid this kind of problem. Unless, of course, it introduces way too many new characters. While the movie is overall self-contained enough that someone who never watched the show can still understand the plot, I think it doesn't do a very good job reintroducing the main characters and the setting. You only get a very basic impression, and it certainly doesn't help that 2 of the 6 main characters that are in almost every scene do nothing of importance. Rarity got at least one good scene with Kappa, and Rainbow Dash is the one who convinces Selino and her crew to be themselves again. Actually, Fluttershy had a scene at some point. Apparently there was a scene in which Fluttershy befriends some animals in a sea pony prison. The art box sadly doesn't explain exactly what was supposed to happen, it is only offhandedly mentioned. Seems like both AJ and Fluttershy would have gotten much more to do if the sea ponies had gotten more time. The one who got the most focus beside Twilight is Pinkie Pie of all ponies, which frankly somewhat surprised me. Maybe just me, but I always had the feeling that the show is usually trying to push Rainbow Dash the most. But I think Pinkie Pie works surprisingly well, especially as she is meant to contrast Twilight in this one. While Twilight starts to distrust everyone and takes everything super serious, Pinkie Pie is like always the funny comic relief and always looking for new friends. And her methods almost convinced Queen Nova to help, so having her calling out Twilight when she screws up was surprisingly effective. Now about Twilight freaking out, saying that she would have been better off without friends like Pinkie. I have mixed feelings about the scene. Frankly, I can understand why Twilight said it. She was stressed out, while her friends seemingly don't take the situation seriously enough. Pinkie Pie, and Rainbow Dash in particular, attracted unwanted attention, making things harder for them than necessary. Don't get me wrong, Twilight obviously shouldn't have said that, and their friends were right to be angry with her. But I'm not a big fan of that forced group breakup cliché. However, I still think that it is at least somewhat understandable why Twilight snapped in the end. And to this movie's credit, her friends didn't abandon Twilight outright. It was more like they were leaving her alone for 5 minutes to let her think about what she just said, while they are waiting right around the corner, and no one could have guessed that Tempest would show up in that very moment. Aren't you forgetting someone? What about me? I mean the cat that was originally me, you know, Kappa. Well, he's easily my favorite character in the movie. Wait, what? Yeah, Kappa pretty much sees the show in every scene he is in. He's charismatic, funny, and every cat that gets the idea to use the dragon as a flamethrower is awesome in my book. He of course suffers the same problems as the other new characters. His contribution don't really matter in the great scheme of things, but he tries, and his advantage is that he gets introduced earlier than Selino and Skystar and sticks around. of course him trying to sell the main 6 to Verco is quite shady, and that he immediately gets second forks after Rarity fixes his jacket is arguably a bit rushed. But I think it works, as Kepper never really was a bad guy to begin with, only a little bit desperate to pay his debts. He thinks he has to do bad things to survive, but realizes in the last second that he can't go that far. So I balked it when he risked his own life by lying to Tempest. Not to mention that he is the one who gives the Remain 5 their courage back after Twilight was kidnapped. And while their cover was blown, he did manage to get them back into Canterlot. Unlike Selenor and Skystar, who were basically just extra muscle, as the writers didn't exactly know what to do with them, they seemed had at least an idea how Kepper could contribute. Well, this might be because Kepper is perhaps the one character who changed the least from his initial conception. Sure, he was originally meant to be me, a fox with a sentient scorpion tail, and went through a couple of redesigns until they settled on a cat, but those are just visuals. He was always supposed to be the rogue that first tries to trick the ponies only to befriend them later. Now, I would have had a subplot in which Rarity helped me to accept my somewhat strange parts. In other words, if you think that I look weird, that was the point. I was meant to learn a lesson about inner beauty and self-acceptance. Now, while I'm of course upset that I was replaced with that cat, I can accept that there wasn't enough room to fit that subplot in, and it was probably the right decision to cut it. Besides that, there seemingly isn't much of a difference between me and Kappa, though Kappa's origin story is a bit confusing. The art book and other promotion materials describe him as a former aristocrat that lost everything when the Storm King came and now he is in debt to him. The prequel comics on the other hand depict him as an orphan who grew up on the streets and is in debt to Verco. His background story is never addressed in the movie, so it doesn't really matter. But it seems to line up more with the comic version, as he wants to sell the ponies to Verco to make his debts disappear. The art book seemingly got it wrong. Speaking of Verco though, he was originally named Greedy and was supposed to play a much larger role in the movie. The main 6 were supposed to meet him and his sidekick Needy, who also made a very small appearance in the final movie at the end of Kepper's song, immediately after they left Equestria, and stick around for seemingly the entire thing, as concept artwork shows them in scenes that were supposed to take place after Twilight has been kidnapped by Tempest. Though I think this was a change for the better. It would have been interesting to see more of him, sure, but having another major character in the movie would have been too much. And I don't think that he needed more than the one scene he got. Well, I guess this is a good point to wrap things up. I overall enjoyed My Little Pony the movie, but it has some noticeable flaws. It tried to do way too many things at once, while adding way too many characters. That being said, I think those characters are all great and I would love to see more of them, which of course makes it somewhat worse that they didn't get as much screen time as they deserve. However, the biggest problem is that it is very evident that they changed the ending but didn't adjust the rest of the movie to make it fit. You feel that the Hippogriffs were supposed to show up, but they don't. As a result, the whole adventure of the main 6 lacks a satisfying payoff. They only managed to save the day thanks to a lot of luck. Not helping is that the movie does many of the same mistakes pretty much every two-parter of the show does. But there's still a lot to like, and there actually are a couple of scenes with very clever writing. Now, some of you might be saying that I should judge this movie for what it is and not for what it could have been based on the art book or the tie-in comics. And for the most part, I did that. I only looked into the art book after I watched the movie because I felt something was missing and I hoped to get some deeper insight. I wanted to understand what went wrong, and it offered some answers. Now, as far as the comics and the Stormy Road to Canterlot are concerned, I think they enhanced the experience as they helped me to understand the characters better, even if they highlighted a bit of wasted potential. So while you don't have to read them, I would still recommend to check them out. But what about you? Did you like this movie? Anything that bothered you? Let me know in the comments. Also, please consider to subscribe and check out my Patreon. I am Tricky Fox. And I'm Mendax. Stay foxy, everyone.
Sly as a fox, you got me under your spell. But you know I'll never tell that I know you know so well. Sometimes you can be too smart for your